Welcome to the Hunting Happiness Podcast. We're on to the next episode. I'm looking forward to you hearing it, getting involved with these concepts. What do we do on the Hunting Happiness Podcast? We maximize happiness and we master mentality. That's what we're looking to do, and we're looking to make life a whole lot better. So wherever you're listening to this from, make sure you subscribe. You can check it out on the Chris P. Austin YouTube channel, on all podcast hosting platforms that you can think of. You just got to search Chris P. Austin, Hunting Happiness. You'll be able to find it, click and subscribe. So today, we're getting into the fastest way to short-term happiness. And immediately, I don't want you to think to yourself, well, why just short-term? This is a situation in honesty where you're looking to make life a little bit better immediately. And the number one thing I want to make sure that you understand is going into this conversation right now of the fastest way to achieve short-term happiness doesn't mean that you can't have long-term happiness. I want to be clear about that. So this short-term happiness that we're going to talk about today, and that I'm going to hit you with over the head, it's not going to mean that you cannot have long-term happiness. And quite the contrary, it's going to set you up to have long-term happiness if that's what you want, which if you're listening to this podcast, it's got to be what you want. So, getting into it. Fastest way to have short-term happiness. This is the fastest way. Surround yourself with people who make you happier. And to be able to do that, that requires some honesty. Because so many of us were raised with a certain ideology from our family or from our neighborhood or from the people around us naturally who we didn't control. We didn't have a choice of necessarily where we grew up, but we didn't have a choice of who we were going to be around with our family. And family's important. That's reality. Friends are important. Work environment's important. School environment's important. However, there is one area that you can completely control that so many of us aren't controlling, and that is who we spend our time around. So, rewire everything learned as a youth about you have to spend your time doing this or that. You have to spend your time with your family. You have to spend your time with your friends. You have to spend your time with your loved ones. You have to spend your time with whoever. Ultimately, you get to choose who you spend your time with. And if you want to have short-term happiness and or long-term happiness, it's really important that you choose to spend your time with the people who actually make you happy. So how to know if people actually make you happy? Because perhaps you're a person who's been inside of this rolling consistency of mediocrity. Maybe you're a person who's had a great experience. Maybe you're a person who's having an unideal experience, but either way, this concept remains the same. You want to make sure that your time and energy are spent around the people who make you the most happy. So being able to identify the people who make you the most happy starts with when you have smiles on your face and when you're laughing the most often. So sit back for a moment and think about for you when that is. When are you smiling the most, and when do you most often have laughs? And can you find a common denominator or common denominators of that experience? Can you find a common denominator literally when you're smiling and laughing? Because if you can do that, then that's going to be the type of person or the type of people you want to spend your time around. And contrary, do you have times where you find yourself unhappy, or you find yourself in a spin, or you find yourself not in the ideal mind frame? And in those situations, who are you spending your time around? So it is a reality that you, if you were to have long-term happiness, it would be more predicated on you, decisions you make, how you build yourself. That's something that we're going to get into on this podcast. But for right now, this short-term happiness that I'm talking about, again, I'll remind you, this doesn't mean that you can't have long-term happiness. This is the fastest way to get your quick fix. It's start to take an inventory on where you're spending your time and who you're spending your time around, and make that the more ideal person. And this is probably the most challenging thing that I've found in my time working with people. There is a really strong discomfort in our culture with telling people that you're going to choose something else. That can be really challenging for people when they first approach the idea of that. Being able to tell somebody, I'm going to spend less time around you. Or being able to tell somebody, this isn't the situation that I want to be in. I want to choose a different situation. And I'm going to choose a different situation. That can be really challenging. So a lot of people will allow themselves to sit in mediocrity or worse because they don't want to do somebody else a disservice or have somebody else have their feelings hurt. But ultimately, you are training the habit that is going to cause long-term problems for everybody if you're faking it. If you're just in a situation, whether that be a family relationship, if that be a significant other relationship, if that be a friendship, if that be a part of a team, if you are inside of a relationship and in honesty it doesn't feed your soul, it doesn't add value for you, but you're doing it so that you don't hurt someone else's feelings or so you don't change the status quo, well, you're living the lie anyway. You're setting yourself up for long-term issue, because the longer that you drag that out, that mediocrity, that lack of desire, that unideal, the worse it's going to become in the long run. So being able to identify where you feel the most happy is crucial. And I want to be clear, this doesn't mean that you're going to have a perfect setup. I only want you to put yourselves in situations where you're 100% happy all the time. That's not necessarily the reality, because life will have variables. Life will have conversations that have to be had. And more than anything, life is going to have a little bit of ebb and flow. However, you can see the common denominator in when you're smiling, when you're laughing, when you're happy, when you catch yourself in these environments that you don't want to leave so quickly. And you can be honest with yourself internally and say when you're in these environments that you do want to leave, rather quickly. Or if you had your choice, you would choose something else. Start to identify those and be willing to make the challenging decision to say, I'm not going to put my time and energy into this. Even if it's your family. If there's members of your family who just take away from your happiness and you being around them creates an energy that you don't enjoy, spend less time in that environment. If you have this situation with a teammate or a classmate and you just have spent a lot of time around them because you don't have other friends or because that's just all you've ever known, be willing to step out and go, even if it's on your own temporarily. But choose to separate yourself away from the things that don't feed your soul. Choose to separate yourself from the things that don't create ideal mentality, because that is a link to your happiness. It's an unlock. Like, who you spend your time around does not have to be who you become, but you ultimately will start to show the signs and the habits and the traits of who you spend your time around. That's just scientific. That's reality. Look at your sample size. If you spend your time around a team, you develop the culture, unless you're setting the culture. If you spend your time around a person, you start to share some like-minded ideologies. It doesn't mean everything, but you start to share some things. And the longer that goes on, the less control you have over what is actually being taken in and what actually is coming out. That's real. Ultimately, who you spend your time around is going to be a lot of where your happiness resides. So the point of what I'm giving you is, if you don't feel at your max in terms of happiness, what you want to make sure that you do right away is take an inventory on who you're spending your time with, where your time is going right now, where it's being allotted, from school or work, from the things you do outside of school or work, from your extracurricular, whatever is taking up your time right now. Take an inventory on who you're spending it with and be willing to make the decision to add more time with the people who are creating the smiles, creating the laughs, creating the ideal, and be willing to take less time with the people who are creating sadness around you, the people where you feel unideal. You don't feel ideal. You feel angry. You feel sad. You feel lost. You feel, out of place. Put yourself in the environment where you feel happy. Put yourself in the environment where you see the laughs and you see the smiles. That is going to be the fastest way to short-term happiness. And it's worth pursuing that, again, because having short-term happiness is not going to keep you away from long-term happiness. Long-term happiness is going to be developed by what you create inside of yourself. It's not going to be created by other people. But that short-term happiness, you can make sure that you set the stage and you set your surroundings. It's like any other thing. If you want to have a great performance, say you're an actress or you're in the ballet. If you want to have a great performance, you've got to have great surroundings. It can't just be you existing wherever. If you want to have a great performance as an athlete, you've got to have great surroundings. The stage has got to be set. And so it's the same as a human being. If you want to have the ideal situation, happiness, then you're going to have to make sure the stage and what's around you is set. You got to set the table for this happiness. And a lot of that, again, is making sure that the people around you are who and what and how you want to be. You're not going to change other people unless they want to change. That's a really important concept in life. You're not going to have the opportunity to change another person unless they come to the table and say that they want to make an adjustment or they want to shift and change. But the person who you have control over changing and shifting is you. And the number one thing you can change and shift right now is your habits of where you spend your time. Literally, where you place your body, where you place your mind, where you place your voice. If you put a little bit of a different spin on those things and start putting energy in towards your happiness, you're going to catch yourself with a nice stage set. You're going to catch yourself with a nice setup. So when you go into this week, be willing to sit down and take an inventory. Find the common denominators. When am I at my most happy? When am I smiling? When am I laughing? When am I ideal? And look at the common denominators of when you're not feeling great, when you're not feeling the most ideal, when you're not feeling set up. And then be willing to make the challenging decision. Be willing to make the challenging decision of, if I'm not having my soul fed in these situations, I'm going to separate myself from those situations. And if I do have my soul fed in these situations, I'm going to push to have myself involved in those situations more often. If you do that, your short-term happiness is going to rise astronomically. Like faster than you can even imagine, it's going to shoot up. So if you're looking for that, if you're looking for more happiness in your life, that's an unlock right there. Spend your time with the people who are feeding your soul. Take your time away from the people who aren't. Where you can find this podcast, Chris P. Austin, Hunting Happiness, on any of the podcast hosting platforms. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, drop in the comments what topics you want to hear about, who you want to see on the show, who you want to see me interview, and I'll see you next podcast.